evening and welcome to Middlesex Update. I'm Melissa Hurley. Thank you for joining us here today. And today we have on with us a Somerville resident, Pam McGlaughlin. And Pam, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Pam has a story that many of you are familiar with. She has a loved one who went over to war. She had to survive for a little while on her own. And what she's done is she's written a memoir about her mother, in her case, who went over to World War II. It's called Celia, Army, Nurse, and Mother Remembered. And when you're looking at the front of it, you'll see a scene. Pam herself has been living in Somerville for a little over 30 years, but the scene is actually of the White Mountains in New Hampshire because that is where your mother was from.
Yes.
You lived there for a little while when you were
Yes.
younger. Tell me a little bit about the story. What made you want to write this memoir?
Well, about 4 years ago, I happened to open up my files at home, and I had quite a collection of V-mail.
Mm-hmm.
Victory mail was mail that the servicemen and women wrote home to their loved ones. And through the years, my family began sending me the mail, basically after my mother died in 1989. And I had such a collection of it. I knew it was a piece of American history.
Mm-hmm.
And I also believe that nurses never ever got the recognition
Right.
that they truly deserved. And I hope, too, that by writing the book and publishing it, that it would inspire women and men,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps, to go into the nursing vocation.
Mm-hmm.
So 4 years ago, I started to put the book together, and about 2.5 years after I started, my supervisor at work happened to see an article in the Boston Globe about self-publishing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the route I went, and I self-published it a year ago. My mother, in 1942, was a single mother at the time. My father had left the family when I
Mm-hmm.
was born, and nurses were in great demand. And many people have said to me, how could a mother leave a young child?
Right.
But I think you have to recognize the times,
Mm-hmm.
and it certainly was a very patriotic time for our nation.
Mm-hmm.
So she joined the U.S. Army Corps with a rank of second lieutenant, and she was stationed at Fort Devens. And it was
Oh.
at this time that she began writing letters home to her family.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I was 2 years old, and it was only the Army that would accept women with children. So I went to live with her older sister, Catherine, and Uncle Morris, and they were wonderful substitute parents.
Right.
And they always kept her image alive the 2 years that she was gone, showing me pictures and talking
Mm-hmm.
about her. When my mother joined the Army, she signed up for foreign service. And in May of 1943, she was shipped overseas. And she arrived in North Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And General Rommel, the German general, had just left. He went home to Germany. He apparently was sick. And the U.S. Allied forces had secured the area. And what a situation my mother went into. If you like, I can read the first letter that she sent home.
Well, let's take a step backwards. When you were reading all the victory mail,
Yes.
and I also just want to point out that, from my understanding, the victory mail was read by the government as well before they sent it over.
Yes.
So it was really, although the families were able to send it, it was called victory because they probably mostly talk about good things and
Right.
to keep the spirits up. How did you feel as though you learned more about your mother, maybe saw a different side that you hadn't seen? It must have been just really interesting and amazing to read all of these different letters that came from her when you were so young, and you had remembered one thing and then reading other parts of it.
Yes, I found it very interesting for me as
Mm-hmm.
a daughter to look back and see the wonderful spirit of my mother
Right.
at 32 years of age
Right.
and what she went through. And my mother never ever talked about the war as I was growing up and as she
Mm-hmm.
raised the rest of the family. It wasn't until maybe 10 years before she passed away in 1989 that she started to tell a bit about the war. And so I got a very different glimpse of my mother,
Mm-hmm.
a wonderful one. I'm very proud of her for what she did.
How long did you research everything before you actually ended up writing the book?
Not much. I started right away. I started compiling the letters. And if you've ever seen V-mail, it can be very difficult
Yeah,
to
we
read.
have a
Here's
couple of
piece.
people on their screens at home are probably seeing it right now. And
Yes.
actually, when I was looking at it earlier, these particular ones are in
Mm-hmm.
cursive, and there's no lines. So actually, your mother
Right.
had great penmanship. But Yeah, they are. They are a little hard to read.
They
made copies and then everything, and they were very small too when they came. It was
at times I had to use a magnifying glass, but I knew my mother's writing.
Right.
And she wrote very simply, and I'm sure as she sat on the battlefronts of North Africa and Italy, she never realized that one day they would be published and people would be reading them. And it's interesting, at the time, 4 years ago, I had a 32-year-old daughter, and she said to me, "Ma, who's going to be reading Nana's letters?" She hadn't read them. Well, she's really surprised today.
Right.
One of the things I learned as I was writing the book, I tried to get my mother's World War II war medals, and I wasn't getting any place. And one of the things I learned that there was a fire at the National Archives in St. Louis, Missouri in 1973, and it has wiped out all the Army records from 1912 to 1959 and half the Air Force.
Really, from 1912 to 19, because that's almost 50 years.
That's right. And so they're trying to reconstruct. I doubt if they'll ever reconstruct everything. So I contacted Congressman Mike Capuano's office, and within 6 weeks, the medal arrived. And I'd like to read.
Oh, that's wonderful.
What happened.
It's a nice memento.
Yes, and that was during the summer of 2001. And as I opened up the package, I looked at the World War II Victory Medal, and attached to the red striped ribbon was a large gold medallion. It depicts a woman on the front, and on the back is written, United States of America, 1941-1945, freedom from fear and want, freedom of speech and religion. And I reflected, and in our nation, the United States, may we never forget the many freedoms that God has blessed us with, and the sacrifices that were made to acquire those treasured freedoms. And may we never be afraid to defend our life values and to protect our nation. Praise God.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Now, just out of curiosity, when you did get the medal, now are you keeping the medal, or did you send it back to the archive?
No, I kept the medals. And one of the things
I probably would have too.
Yep.
Just wondering.
Absolutely. And one of the things I did was I had a shadow box made up with my mother's picture, the cover of the book, some of the V-mail, and the medals as a remembrance for the family.
That's great, and it's a great book too because it's very easy reading. When you're looking through it, there's a lot of pictures. There's many pictures. You have some of the V-mail. You have some pictures of your mother. You have your aunt in here. It must have been hard though, knowing that you'd moved to a different place.
I don't remember because I was only 2 years old. And the first recollection I have of my mother is meeting her at the train station in Dublin, New Hampshire in 1944, and she had just come home from the war. She was in uniform, and I remember sitting in the car, and we were riding back to my aunt and uncle's house. And she seemed to be somewhat of a stranger to me, but we were quickly reunited and bonded together. And after the war, she came to Boston, and she resumed her nursing career at Mass General Hospital. And 3 years later, she met and married my stepfather. And then she raised 5 sons, and we lived in West Roxbury. And she was always a nurse to the very end. Whenever somebody was sick in the family, my mother was always there, whether it was her brother dying of lung cancer or one of her sisters dying of breast cancer. My mother was always there at the very end. And she was a nurse. She worked at the recuperative center in West Roxbury. She was the evening nurse from 11 to 7. And towards the end of her life, as I said, she started to talk about the war and some experiences. And had I known I was writing a book, I would have grilled her, but of course I couldn't.
Well, it's interesting because now, more and more often you hear of people who have a family member that's older, and, life is so precious that you'll hear about grandkids asking their grandparents, they say to just bring a tape recorder and just turn the tape on, turn record on, and talk to them for half an hour, and just get their experiences because it's so different than what we have today. I mean, if you think about today, I mean, even just you're talking about the V-mail and how hard it was to read. Well, today, at certain times, and when you're in the armed services, at certain times you can't use email, but they have email where they can contact their kids and their family members at any time. There's much more use of the telephone. It's just there's not that feeling of separation, as much of a feeling of separation as there was in your case.
Yes, and somebody asked me recently, what kind of a legacy did your mother leave behind? and I reflected a moment, and I said, my mother, first of all, had a great faith. We're a Catholic family, and she always practiced her faith. She always prayed the rosary. She had a great devotion to the Blessed Mother, patroness of the United States. So she had a great love of God, and she had a great love of family. She always believed in being connected to the family, whether it was by a letter or a telephone call or a prayer. My mother was always there and always for the family.
Right.
And finally, she believed in love of one's nation, to defend it and to protect it when necessary.
Do you feel that there's a certain responsibility and duty to one's state and to one's world that has maybe been lost in some years?
Oh, I do. Absolutely.
You know, knowing what your mother went through. And
yes, and the ideals for what they fought.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm part of a rosary group, and we meet always on Monday evening. We pray for the nation,
Mm-hmm.
for our protection and the well-being of everyone in the nation.
Right.
And I think that's very important today.
Well, that's very interesting. Let's go back to your mother again. She was stationed in South Africa.
Yes, North Africa.
North Africa. And tell me a little bit about that. And you were mentioning earlier off camera that you thought she was well suited to be stationed over there.
Yes, she was born in Tamworth, New Hampshire in 1911.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they were used to a lot of snow and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of heat in the summer and snakes and all kinds of reptiles. And when she arrived in North Africa, if you like, I'd like to read the first letter that she sent home. It was May 19th, 1943, North Africa. And this is what she found. She was writing home to her sister Charlotte in Boston. Mm-hmm. And she said, here I am in North Africa, in a tent on a dusty, rolling hillside. It's very hot during the day and cool in the evening. We sleep 6 in a tent on cots with netting covering our cots. The first week we slept on the ground. There are lots of vineyards and pretty red poppies here, and the damn flies, mosquitoes, lizards, snakes, toads, and scorpions are too numerous to mention. The water is full of chlorine and tastes terrible. There's so much lime in the water that our hair is turning gray. So while the nurses were in North Africa, they had to be aware of malaria. Many times, even though they didn't have malaria, they'd be carrying the disease.
Right.
They had terrific heat. My mother always minded the heat, and sometimes the heat would get up to 140 degrees.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, and sometimes it would be very hot, cold at night, hot during the day. And they used to have monsoon rains, rainy periods of perhaps 3 months. And so it was very difficult nursing under those conditions.
Right. It's not only was she over there in a foreign land, but she was also doing her duty, dealing with patients, but also having to deal with the weather.
Yes. And she dealt, of course, she nursed U.S. servicemen. She had German patients, prisoners of war. She had Arab patients. So she had a different variety of people that she had to work with.
Great. Well, Pam, you've read a few excerpts from your story. What's your favorite letter, would you say, out of the book? What's your favorite part of the book?
Well, I like it all.
I do want to note that when you're reading the book, there's 2 emails that have pictures on them.
Yes.
One seems to be a little Christmas card, and then there's another one that's an Easter card as well, which are nice. And the Easter card that Easter card is very cute. It almost looks like it's a Mickey Mouse.
It is. That is a Mickey Mouse, yes.
What's your favorite excerpt?
Well, there's a couple here. I like particular this one from North Africa, dated October 14th, 1953. She was writing to her sister-in-law in Tamworth, New Hampshire, and she said, nothing much here new except rain, rain, and mud. The only pretty things are rainbows, beautiful sunsets, and moons between the heavy rains. She said, we had our first death in the 53rd tonight, and we have handled over 3,000 patients, which is an excellent record. Keep writing, and if we move, I'll receive it somewhere, someday. So they were very busy, and she mentioned in her letters, sometimes they worked 2 weeks with no time off, but they also had some recreational type activities. They loved to go to the movies. They used to have a big tent with movies set up. They loved to go swimming in the Mediterranean. And my mother was a great swimmer. She
Mhm.
always swam a lot when she was up in Tamworth and Chicora Lake.
Mhm.
And one of the letters that I particularly like, at the end of her North African experience, which was December of 1943, she then moved on to Italy, the Naples area,
Okay.
which was a scene of heavy fighting, and they were bombed. And I remember that as she moved there, her letter, she mentioned Mount Vesuvius was in the process of erupting at the time, and snow was on the ground. And she was there for a couple of months nursing, and then she herself got sick. She had gallstone attacks. She had arthritis of the spine. I suppose at times that was from maybe sleeping on the ground and the
Right.
uneven weather conditions. And I remember one particular letter in which she wrote home, and she was in the hospital herself at the time. And even though she was in the hospital, she was kept busy censoring mail. The Army was very
What do you
careful.
mean by censoring mail?
Well, she would censor the mail that the servicemen wrote home back to the States. And
Okay.
if there was something there that shouldn't be there, she would just take a black line and ink it out. They were very careful as to the information that they wanted sent
Right.
home. And I remember in one particular letter, she said, well, I'm just laying here daydreaming and thinking about swimming in Chicora Lake or climbing the mountain or resting on the raft at White Pond. So her thoughts were always of home. And I remember one letter that she wrote to me.
Oh,
It was
so-
towards the end of her service in Italy. And she,
So she went to North Africa.
yes,
Went to Italy.
she went to Italy. And then at the end of her Italian tour, she became sick and she was sent home. And
Okay.
she went to Rhodes General Hospital in New York and recovered.
So
and
she
then,
recovered and then she came back.
yes, she did. And I remember one particular letter, if I can find it here, in which she wrote a letter to me. It's dated April 4th, 1944, Italy. And she said, Dear Pammy, how's my little gal today? Did you have a nice trip to Aunt Charlotte's? And did Mary Jane, Carol, and Marcia play with you? They were my young cousins, and we grew up together. She said, I bet you had a nice party. Next year you will be 4 years old, and I hope I'll be home for your birthday. We will have lots of fun. I saw the Easter Bunny over here. He said that you and Morris, that's my young cousin, were nice, so he was going to bring you Easter baskets. I got your pretty card and put it on my bureau besides your picture. How is Panda, Donald Duck, and all the other dolls? Be a good girl. Happy Easter. Love, Mama. So her thoughts, you know, were always of the family and of me, and the family was writing back and forth.
Well, those are just great memories.
Yes,
Really, you're really lucky to have all those memories and also be able to compile them all
absolutely.
and make them into this book. And where is this book for sale? Where
Barnes and Noble
Okay.
has it. Any of the bookstores can order it, and the publisher is First Books.
When did it come out?
1 year ago.
1 year ago.
And there's been a tremendous amount of publicity.
Right, I was just going to say that we were talking earlier, and you've just been mentioned in all across New England, all
Yes.
different types of magazines and
Yeah.
newspapers, and there's actually someone who may want to do a movie,
Yes.
which maybe you'll come back as a movie star
Oh,
sometime.
gee.
But aside from writing the book, you also you work with elderly.
I do.
And tell me where you work.
Yes, I work for the Somerville Cambridge Elder Services. I've been there going on 9 years, and I run the medical escort program. I have 100 clients in their 80s and 90s, and I have 12 great volunteers, and they take the elderly to their appointments and then make sure they're safely in their home.
This book must be good therapy for them, or even just talking to you.
A couple of people have read the book,
Yeah.
and they've really liked it.
Yeah, because in that age, they have family members of themselves who've gone
Yes.
to war, so they're familiar with it. Do you ever talk to any school groups or the
Oh,
younger
I
generation?
have. Yes, I have. And I've done a lot of book signings, especially at assisted livings.
Okay.
The older generation love to discuss the book, and they, of course, they remember World War II
Right.
vividly and the sacrifices that were made.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's your mother, and those people would be considered the greatest generation. And but you grew up in a different time.
I
You grew
did.
up when it was customary for people to go off to war, and I think that this generation wasn't used to that until after 9/11, and so now there may be, when you talk to school groups or youngsters, some of them may have family members that are over in Iraq or in,
Yes.
Do you ever talk to them and get any feelings from them? I mean, it must be interesting to see their perspective and their take on this.
Not only in World War II, I found they were interested in my personal life.
Oh, really?
I remember speaking to one particular group, and they were very interested and wanted to know all about the polio and that I had, and that was very interesting.
Like, what kind of questions do they ask you?
They wanted to know how long I was in the hospital. Did I feel any different when I came home? How did my friends treat me? They must have asked questions for about 20 minutes.
Really?
And that really surprised me and the teachers.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
That must be very interesting. So so you've written the book. I mean, are you planned to do a follow-up?
I don't think so. I edited the book once, and I'm doing another editing. There's always something that you think of that you'd like to add, and the book is also being considered for the Book of the Year award with the American Journal of Nursing for the best public interest story.
That's great.
Yes.
That's great. And it's called, once again, it's called Celia, Army Nurse and Mother Remembered. And Celia was your mother's name.
Yes.
That's great. And it's a nurse for the century. Could be nurse for the centuries, I guess. You could always, because it seems like she was an unbelievable woman. So we've talked about her. We've talked about your family life. There's actually, you're just flipping through, and tell me about this picture. It's Frank and Michelle wedding day with family pets.
Oh, well, okay. That's my daughter, Michelle.
Oh, your daughter, okay.
She was raised in Somerville.
That's funny.
She went to St. Catherine's School, and she was married in 2000, the year 2000, June 2000, and she's in the veterinary field. She graduated from the University of Massachusetts, and she was in the Air Force ROTC.
Okay.
And the day she was married, at her wedding reception, she had her 4 Chinese Shar-Peis. She brought them to the wedding, and it was a great day.
Great. So she was in the Air Force?
Well, at college, ROTC for 2 years. And we seem to have a strong military background in our family. Yeah. Yes, we have several people that were in Vietnam, and there are 4 people now who are in Iraq. And one of them is a doctor from New Hampshire, gave up his practice about 8 weeks ago, left a baby and a 2-year-old and his wife, and he's over in Iraq now, and he said he just felt he had to go, he had to do something.
That seems to be the feeling among some people, and you probably should show him the book too. I bet they would enjoy. Yeah, send it to him over there. I bet they would enjoy it. And this is a great picture of your mother. Now, this is taken in the service?
Yes.
Is this something that she sent home?
That was taken before she left, as she joined, November 6, 1942. And this is a picture as she was going overseas to North Africa. And
I can see all the snow.
Yes, that was taken in
Is that you?
That's me. I was 2. That's Dublin, New Hampshire. And this is a picture taken with my brother John about 3 years before she died in 1986.
Oh, nice. Well, you can see it Christmas time.
Yes.
Well, we're wrapping up to the end of the show. And tell me, any last thoughts?
If anyone had met my mother through the years, as I said, she never talked about the war. She was just a family person, very quiet, very unassuming, just went about her daily duty. And yet she had this extraordinary other part to her. And I'm glad that I was able to finally put it in a book and let people know what great people we have in this nation. And my book is dedicated to World War II veterans for the sacrifices which they made for the nation.
Well, you're a wonderful woman as well, to be able to, it must have, so many emotions must have been going through you, emotions of joy, of fear, even of being upset, everything when you were going through the V-mail and then compiling everything again, and then and also each time you go out and talk about it.
Right.
As you said, you've done numerous book signings.
Yes,
and
I have.
Fielded questions, and you never know what the questions are going to be and how you're going to react at that moment, especially coming from a family where, as you said, your mother really didn't talk about it.
No.
It wasn't something that you grew up with. You kind of blocked that out, maybe it was because you were so young.
Right. But I always felt confident about the book. I just knew I had to do it, and I just knew there was a book inside me, and this is it. And it's a book to be proud of.
Well, that's great. That's great. I want to thank you for being on Middlesex Update.
Thank you.
And once again, it's called Celia, Army Nurse and Mother Remembered, and it's by Pam McGlaughlin, who is a Somerville resident, and many of you are watching from the Somerville Cambridge Elder Service. You probably recognize her. I want to again thank you for being on Middlesex Update.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, it's great. It was very interesting, and I want to actually read the book now.
Okay.
Now that I have, now that I got a little taste of what it's all about, and saw all the wonderful photos. That wraps it up for this edition of Middlesex Update, and I'm Melissa Hurley. We will see you all again soon. Good night.